He thought he'd spend his last days alone, watching the sun set over a quiet ranch. But what he found hiding in the trees changed everything, and started a chain of events no one in town could have predicted. Thank you so much for watching, and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The harsh Arizona sun beat down on Thomas Blackwood's weathered face as he rode his horse along the edge of his property. At 67, each day brought more pain than the last. The doctor in town had given him 6 months at best. The lung disease that plagued him wouldn't wait much longer. With no family left to inherit his modest ranch, Thomas had made peace with the idea that everything he'd built would likely be claimed by the bank or some opportunistic neighbor once he was gone. His horse, an aging Palomino named Sonny, suddenly jerked to a stop near a cluster of cottonwood trees. Thomas squinted, noticing movement in the brush. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle in his saddle holster. "Who's there?" "Show yourself," he called out, his voice raspy from years of hard living. The rustling continued, followed by the appearance of a small figure, a child no more than 8 or 9 years old. An Apache girl, thin and frightened, with dirt-streaked cheeks and torn clothes. She stared at him with wide, defiant eyes, despite clearly being exhausted and hungry. Thomas lowered his rifle. "Where'd you come from, little one?" he asked, scanning the horizon. There was no sign of anyone else. The girl remained silent, her dark eyes watching him warily. Thomas noticed dried blood on her arm. "You're hurt," he said, slowly dismounting. His joints protested, reminding him of his deteriorating condition. "I won't harm you. My ranch is just over that ridge. There's food, water." The girl took a step back, her expression distrustful. "I understand," Thomas nodded. "These days, trust is hard to come by." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out some jerky and a small canteen. He placed them on the ground and stepped back. "Take it, it's yours." After a long moment, hunger won out over fear. The girl darted forward, snatched the offerings, and retreated to a safe distance. She devoured the jerky while watching him carefully. "My name's Thomas Blackwood," he sighed, not expecting a response. "You can call me Thomas." To his surprise, the girl spoke, her voice barely audible. "Nisha." Thomas smiled, the action feeling foreign on his weathered face. "Nisha, that's a fine name." He glanced at the sky, noting the position of the sun. "I need to head back before dark. You're welcome to come along. Or take the food and be on your way, your choice." Thomas mounted Sonny with difficulty, his lungs burning with the effort. He waited, not looking directly at the girl, giving her space to decide. After a moment, he clicked his tongue and Sonny began walking back toward the ranch. He'd gone about 50 yards when he heard small footsteps following behind. Thomas didn't turn around. He simply slowed Sonny's pace, allowing the footsteps to keep up. By the time his modest ranch house came into view, with its peeling white paint and sagging porch, the girl was walking alongside his horse, though still maintaining a careful distance. "It ain't much," Thomas said, gesturing to the small ranch, "but it's home." As they approached, Thomas noticed Sheriff Miller's horse tied outside. His stomach tightened. The sheriff rarely brought good news these days. "Seems we have company," Thomas said to Nisha. "Sheriff Miller, he's a decent man, but ... He paused, noticing how the girl tensed at the mention of law enforcement. "You can wait by the barn if you'd prefer. I'll come get you after he's gone." Nisha didn't respond, but she quietly slipped away toward the weathered barn as Thomas dismounted and approached the house. Sheriff Miller stood from his seat on the porch steps. "Thomas," he greeted, his expression grave. "Been looking for you. What brings you out this way, Sheriff?" Thomas asked, tying Sonny to the hitching post. "There was trouble at the Wellington settlement," the sheriff said. "Apache raid. Everyone's Dead men, women, children. Army's been called in from Fort Bowie. Thomas felt a chill despite the heat. When? 2 days ago. We're warning all the outlying ranches. Tensions are high. The commanding officer at Fort Bowie is talking about rounding up all the Apache in the area, hostile or not. Thomas nodded slowly, thinking of the small, frightened girl hiding in his barn. Appreciate the warning. You should consider coming into town until things settle, the sheriff suggested. Man in your condition shouldn't be out here alone. This is my home, Sheriff. I'll die here, not in some town room. The sheriff sighed. Stubborn as always. Just be careful, Thomas. Keep your rifle close. After the sheriff rode away, Thomas stood on his porch for a long moment, watching the dust settle. Then he walked to the barn, where he found Nisha huddled in a corner, trembling. You heard, he said simply. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Were you at that settlement? Thomas asked gently. Nisha shook her head vehemently. No, my people. Dead too, soldiers came. Her broken English was punctuated by grief. I ran, 3 days. Thomas understood then. She wasn't part of any raiding party. She was another victim, caught between 2 worlds at war. Just a child, alone. You're safe here, he said, though he wasn't certain he could keep that promise. Come inside, let's tend to that arm. As the sun began to set over the Arizona desert, casting long shadows across the ranch, Thomas Blackwood made a decision that would change both their lives forever. 2 weeks passed since Thomas had found Nisha. The girl remained cautious but had slowly begun to trust him. Each morning, Thomas woke to find her already up, tending to small chores around the ranch, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, bringing water from the well. She did these things silently, efficiently, as if trying to earn her keep. This morning, Thomas found her sitting on the porch steps, watching the sunrise. Her arm had healed well, the small cut now just a faint mark. Morning, he said, lowering himself beside her with a grimace. His chest felt particularly tight today. Nish, he nodded in acknowledgement, then pointed to the horizon where dust was visible. Riders coming. Thomas squinted, reaching for his spectacles. Your eyes are better than mine, he muttered, finally making out 3 distant figures on horseback. Stay inside, he instructed, reaching for his rifle. Nisha disappeared into the house as Thomas positioned himself on the porch, rifle across his knees. As the riders drew closer, he recognized the lead man, Robert Dawson, owner of the largest cattle ranch in the territory, and a man Thomas had never much cared for. Blackwood, Dawson called out as they approached, his voice carrying across the yard. Quite a surprise to find you still breathing. Disappointed? Thomas replied dryly. Dawson dismounted, flanked by 2 younger men, ranch hands with hard eyes. Sheriff Miller mentioned you were out here alone. Thought we'd check on our neighbor, what with all the Apache trouble. Neighborly of you, Thomas said, not bothering to stand. Considering your property's 20 miles south. Dawson smiled thinly. Word is the Army's conducting sweeps, rounding up all Apache in the territory, taking them to the reservation at San Carlos, so I've heard. You haven't seen any strays around here, have you? Dawson's eyes drifted toward Thomas's house. Any survivors from those settlements? Thomas kept his expression neutral. Just me and the chickens. Dawson nodded slowly, clearly unconvinced. Mind if we water our horses? Been a long ride. Pumps by the barn, Thomas said, knowing a refusal would only increase suspicion. As Dawson's men led the horses away, Dawson lingered. You know, Thomas, your place would make a nice addition to my holdings. Good water access. You've got no family to leave it to. I could make you an offer. Let you live out your days in comfort. Not interested, Thomas replied flatly. Well, the offer stands for now. Dawson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Things are changing in the territory. Apache problem will be dealt with. New railroad coming through. Might be better to sell while you can get a good price. Thomas remained silent, watching as Dawson surveyed the property with calculating eyes. After the men departed, Thomas found Nisha hiding under the kitchen table, clutching a kitchen knife. "They're gone," he assured her. "But they'll be back. Men like Dawson always come back." That evening, as Thomas prepared a simple stew, he was seized by a violent coughing fit. He braced himself against the kitchen counter, handkerchief pressed to his mouth. When he pulled it away, it was spotted with blood. Nisha watched from the doorway, her eyes wide with concern. "It's nothing," Thomas said unconvincingly. "Just a spell." Nisha disappeared, returning moments later with a small pouch. She took some dried herbs from it and gestured toward the boiling water. "Medicine," she explained. "From my mother." Thomas nodded, allowing her to add the herbs to a separate cup of hot water. The bitter tea she prepared didn't stop his coughing entirely, but it seemed to ease the tightness in his chest. Later, sitting on the porch watching the stars emerge, Thomas made a decision. "Nisha," he said softly, "I need to go into town tomorrow." "To see the lawyer." She looked at him questioningly. "This ranch," Thomas explained. "When I'm gone, men like Dawson will try to take it. Unless—" He paused, considering his words carefully. "Unless I leave it to someone. Someone who has a right to it." Nisha's brow furrowed in confusion. "I have no children, no family," Thomas continued. "But I could give you my name. Legally, make you my daughter in the eyes of the law. This place would be yours then." Nisha stared at him, processing his words. "You would not be my father," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "My father died, with my mother, my brothers." "I know," Thomas nodded. "I wouldn't try to replace him. But this would protect you. Give you a place in this world that's trying its hardest to take everything from you." Nisha looked out at the darkening landscape, her young face solemn with understanding beyond her years. "The men who came. They will not let Apache girl have ranch." "They might not," Thomas acknowledged. "But I know people in town. Good people who'll stand by you if you're a Blackwood. It won't be easy, but it's a fighting chance." Thomas watched as she considered this, her small fingers tracing patterns in the weathered wood of the porch step. "Tomorrow," she said finally. "We go tomorrow." That night, Thomas lay awake, listening to the distant howl of coyotes. The decision felt right, yet he worried about Nisha's future in a world that showed little kindness to her people. He had so little time left to prepare her, to teach her what she would need to know. As dawn broke, Thomas found Nisha already dressed, her long black hair neatly braided, wearing the clean clothes he'd purchased from the general store on his last trip to town. She had packed a small bundle of food and filled canteens with fresh water. "Ready," she stated simply. Thomas smiled, touched by her preparedness. "Then let's ride." The town of Copper Springs appeared on the horizon by mid-morning, a collection of wooden buildings shimmering in the heat. Thomas felt Nisha tense behind him on the saddle. "Stay close," he instructed as they approached. "Don't wander off, no matter what anyone says." As they rode down the main street, Thomas was acutely aware of the stairs. Copper Springs wasn't a large town, and the sight of old Thomas Blackwood with a young Apache girl drew immediate attention. He nodded curtly to those he knew, ignoring the whispers that followed them. They tied Sonny outside the law office, a narrow building wedged between the general store and the barber shop. Before entering, Thomas knelt despite the pain in his joints, bringing himself to Nisha's eye level. "Mr. Peterson is a good man," he explained. "He'll help us with the papers. But he'll ask you questions. You don't have to answer anything that makes you uncomfortable." Nisha nodded solemnly. Inside, they found James Peterson at his desk, surrounded by stacks of legal documents. The lawyer looked up, surprise evident on his face. "Thomas, didn't expect to see you in town." His eyes moved to Nisha. "And who might this be?" "This is Nisha," Thomas said, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. I've come to draw up adoption papers. I want to make her my legal daughter. Peterson's eyebrows shot up. Thomas, that's quite unexpected. Perhaps we should speak privately? Anything you have to say can be said in front of her, Thomas replied firmly. Peterson sighed, gesturing for them to sit. Very well. Thomas, you must understand, the adoption of an Indian child, particularly Apache given the current ... tensions. It's complicated. I don't care about complicated, Thomas said. I'm dying, James. You know it. I know it. I want to leave my ranch to Nisha, and I want it legal and binding so nobody can contest it after I'm gone. Peterson studied Thomas for a long moment, then turned his attention to Nisha. Young lady, do you understand what Mr. Blackwood is proposing? He wants to legally become your father. Nisha met his gaze steadily. He is not my father. My father is dead. But he offers me his name, his protection. Peterson seemed taken aback by her direct response. I see. And how did you come to be in Mr. Blackwood's care? Thomas intervened. I found her alone, near my property. Her family was killed. That's all that matters. Thomas, Peterson leaned forward, lowering his voice. There are rumors of Apache raids, reprisals. The army is involved. I need to know she's not connected to any of that. She's a child, James, Thomas said sharply. A child who's lost everything. Now, are you going to help us or not? After a tense moment, Peterson nodded. It will require a judge's approval. Judge Miller only comes through town once a month, and he was here last week. I don't have a month, Thomas said bluntly. Peterson considered this. I could prepare the documents today. You could sign them as your declaration of intent. If something happens before the judge returns, it would at least show your clear wishes. Do it, Thomas agreed. As Peterson began drafting the papers, the door to the office burst open. Sheriff Miller stood there, his expression grim. Thought I recognized your horse, Thomas, he said, eyes fixed on Nisha. Word spreads fast in town. We're conducting legal business, Sheriff, Thomas said calmly. Is that so? The sheriff stepped inside, closing the door behind him. You mind explaining why you're harboring an Apache girl when you told me you were alone at your ranch? I wasn't harboring anyone. I took in an orphan child. The sheriff's gaze softened slightly. Thomas, there's a lot of anger right now. Colonel Bridger and his men are just outside town. They're rounding up all Apache in the area for relocation to San Carlos. She's just a child, Thomas repeated. I understand that, the sheriff said, but people are scared. The Wellington massacre has everyone on edge. She had nothing to do with that. Thomas insisted. The sheriff sighed. Maybe not, but Colonel Bridger won't care. He has orders. Peterson intervened. Sheriff, we're in the process of legal adoption. The girl would be under the protection of territorial law as Thomas Blackwood's daughter. Papers aren't signed by a judge yet, are they? The sheriff countered. They will be, Thomas said firmly. The standoff was interrupted by commotion outside. Through the window, they could see soldiers riding into town, at least a dozen men in blue uniforms, led by a stern-faced officer. That's Bridger, the sheriff said quietly. Thomas, if he finds her here... Thomas looked at Nisha, who had gone completely still, her eyes wide with fear. He made a swift decision. Back door? He asked Peterson. The lawyer nodded toward a rear exit. It leads to the alley. But Thomas, you can't outrun the army. We're not running, Thomas said, an idea forming. We're hiding in plain sight. James, finish those papers. Sheriff, I need your help. Thomas, I can't go against the army, the sheriff protested. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to uphold the law and protect an innocent child. The sheriff hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. What's your plan? Within minutes, Thomas had outlined his idea. Peterson would complete the adoption papers as quickly as possible. The sheriff would intercept Colonel Bridger, keeping him occupied at the front of town. Meanwhile, Thomas and Nisha would make their way to the church at the edge of town, where Father Michael, an old friend of Thomas, might offer sanctuary until the papers were ready. "It's risky," the sheriff warned. "Everything worth doing is," Thomas replied, taking Nisha's hand. "Ready?" She nodded, her small fingers gripping his tightly. They slipped out the back door, into the alley just as the sound of boots and spurs echoed from the main street. Thomas led Nisha through back pathways, staying out of sight, as they made their way toward the small white church visible on the hill at the edge of town. "Almost there," Thomas encouraged, though his breathing had become labored from exertion. Suddenly, a voice called out behind them, "Hold there!" Thomas turned to see two soldiers approaching, rifles at the ready. "Step away from the Indian girl," one ordered. Thomas placed himself between Nisha and the soldiers. "This is my daughter," he said firmly. The soldiers exchanged skeptical glances. "Sir, we have orders to gather all Apache for relocation. Please step aside." "I will not," Thomas stated, standing his ground despite the rifles now pointed at him. "She's under my protection." The standoff was interrupted by the arrival of a third figure, Father Michael, alerted by the commotion near his church. "What's happening here?" the priest demanded. "Father, these men want to take my daughter," Thomas explained quickly. "Father." Michael assessed the situation, then addressed the soldiers. "This is consecrated ground, gentlemen. You have no authority here." "We have orders, Father," one soldier insisted. "And I answer to a higher authority," the priest replied calmly. "The girl is under the church's protection now. You may speak with your commanding officer if you wish to discuss this further." The soldiers hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with confronting a priest. "Come," Father Michael said to Thomas and Nisha. "Let's get inside." As they reached the safety of the church, Thomas was overcome by another coughing fit, more severe than before. He collapsed onto a pew, blood speckling his lips. "Thomas!" Father Michael exclaimed, rushing to his side. "I'm all right," Thomas managed, though it was clearly a lie. Nisha watched him with solemn eyes, understanding in her young face. "You are like my grandfather," she said softly. "He coughed blood before the spirits took him." Thomas smiled weakly. "I've got a bit more time yet. Enough to make sure you're safe." Outside, they could hear raised voices as more soldiers arrived. Time was running out. The afternoon stretched into evening as Thomas, Nisha, and Father Michael remained inside the church. Outside, soldiers maintained their position, waiting for orders from Colonel Bridger. The small church, usually peaceful, had become the center of a tense standoff. Thomas sat in a pew, his breathing labored but stable for now. Nisha remained close to him, occasionally bringing him water or adjusting the blanket Father Michael had provided. "You should rest," Thomas told her. "This could be a long night." Nisha shook her head. "I will watch, like you watched for me." The church door opened, and Sheriff Miller entered, removing his hat. "Thomas, the colonel wants to speak with you." "Let him come in then," Thomas replied. "Alone," the sheriff added, with a meaningful glance at Nisha. Thomas shook his head firmly. "Where I go, she goes." After a brief negotiation, Colonel Bridger was permitted to enter the church, though he was required to leave his sidearm with his men outside, a condition set by Father Michael that the officer grudgingly accepted. Bridger was a tall man with a severe expression and a neatly trimmed mustache. His uniform bore the dust of many miles, but his authority was unmistakable. He approached Thomas, barely acknowledging Nisha or the priest. "Mr. Blackwood," he began without preamble, "I understand you're claiming this Apache child as your daughter." "I am," Thomas confirmed. "Forgive my skepticism," Bridger said dryly, "but I find the timing convenient. Apache raid nearby settlements, and suddenly you discover a paternal instinct for one of them." "She had nothing to do with any raids," Thomas replied evenly. She's a child who lost her family to violence from both sides of this conflict. Bridger's expression remained unmoved. My orders are clear. All Apache are to be relocated to San Carlos Reservation for their protection and the safety of the settlers. She has a name, Thomas said. Nisha, soon to be Nisha Blackwood. And she's under my protection. Protection? Bridger scoffed. From the looks of you, sir, you can barely protect yourself. How long do you expect to live with that cough? What happens to her then? That's been arranged, Thomas said. My lawyer is preparing the adoption papers as we speak. My ranch and everything I own will pass to her. Bridger laughed incredulously. An Apache girl inheriting American property? The courts will never allow it. They will if she's my legal daughter, Thomas insisted. And I have friends in this town who will see that my wishes are respected. The Colonel studied Thomas for a long moment. You're either a very foolish man or a very brave one, Mr. Blackwood. Probably both, Thomas admitted with a small smile. The standoff was interrupted by the arrival of James Peterson, who entered the church carrying several official-looking documents. The papers are ready, Thomas, the lawyer announced, nodding respectfully to Colonel Bridger. Colonel, I've taken the liberty of including affidavits from several respected citizens of Copper Springs, attesting to Mr. Blackwood's character and his sincere desire to adopt this child. Bridger accepted the documents with obvious reluctance, scanning them quickly. This doesn't change my orders. Perhaps not, Peterson agreed, but it does complicate them. As a legal ward of Mr. Blackwood, the girl would be entitled to certain protections under territorial law. Forcibly removing her could be seen as kidnapping. The law also allows for the relocation of Indians to reservations for their own safety, Bridger countered. A matter that could be tied up in the courts for months, Peterson suggested, during which time the girl would remain with her legal guardian. The colonel's jaw tightened. This is a military matter, not a legal one. It's both, Sheriff Miller interjected, stepping forward. Colonel, I respect your authority, but I'm sworn to uphold the law in this territory. If Mr. Blackwood legally adopts this child, my duty is to protect her rights as I would any citizen's. Tension filled the church as Bridger considered his options. Finally, he handed the papers back to Peterson. Very well. Have the girl sign these papers, if she can. Right, and I'll delay her relocation pending the judge's approval. But she remains your responsibility, Blackwood. Any trouble, and my men will return. She's not trouble, Thomas said firmly. After Bridger departed, Thomas turned to Nisha. Do you understand what just happened? You need to sign these papers, agreeing to become Nisha Blackwood. Nisha looked at the document solemnly. I can make my mark, she said. My father taught me. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the church windows, Nisha made her mark on the adoption papers. Peterson witnessed the signatures, making the document as official as possible without a judge's final approval. It's done, Peterson said, rolling up the papers. As soon as Judge Wilson returns, I'll have him finalize everything. Thomas nodded gratefully, then was seized by another coughing fit, this one worse than before. Father Michael helped him to lie down on a pew as Sheriff Miller went to fetch the town doctor. Night had fallen by the time Dr. Harrison arrived. After examining Thomas, he took Father Michael and Sheriff Miller aside, speaking in hushed tones that Thomas couldn't hear, but understood nonetheless. His time was shorter than even he had realized. Later, as the church grew quiet, Thomas found himself alone with Nisha. The girl sat beside him, her small hand resting on his. You will go soon, she said simply. It wasn't a question. Thomas nodded. Sooner than I'd hoped, but you'll be all right. Sheriff Miller and Father Michael will make sure the ranch passes to you. Peterson will help manage things until you're old enough. I don't need the ranch, Nisha said. I need... She paused, struggling with her emotions. You showed me kindness when others showed hate. That's what family does, Thomas replied softly. And we are family now, Nisha Blackwood. Not by blood, but by choice. Sometimes that's the stronger bond. As moonlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across the church floor, Thomas Blackwood and his newly adopted daughter talked quietly. He told her about the ranch where the best grazing lands were, how to maintain the windmill, which neighbors could be trusted. She listened intently, memorizing every detail, occasionally asking questions that revealed a sharp, practical mind. At dawn, Sheriff Miller returned with news that Colonel Bridger and his men had departed for Fort Bowie, leaving instructions that Nisha's status was to be reported to him once the judge made his ruling. It buys us time, the sheriff explained, and Judge Wilson is a fair man. I believe he'll honor your wishes, Thomas. Thomas nodded gratefully. Then let's go home, one last time. The journey back to the ranch was slow, with frequent stops to allow Thomas to rest. By the time the familiar silhouette of the ranch house appeared on the horizon, the sun was beginning to set. Beautiful, isn't it? Thomas murmured, gazing at his land bathed in golden light. Yes, Nisha agreed. Beautiful. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Thomas placed his old pocket watch in Nisha's hand. This was my father's, he explained. Now it's yours. To remember that even when time seems to be running out, there's always hope for a new beginning. Nisha clutched the watch tightly. I will remember. As darkness fell, Thomas Blackwood, rancher, survivor, and now father, watched the first stars appear alongside his daughter, their unlikely bond forged in hardship and sealed in hope. Just before the final sunset of his life,